The pinpricks of light died one by one in the windows of Redemption Creek. The town was a liar. There was no redemption here, only dust and played-out shafts that gaped like open graves in the hills. At 22, Clara felt as old as the mountains, her youth worn thin as the thread she pushed through stiff canvas. She worked from sunup until her eyes burned by the kerosene lamp. A seamstress in a town that could barely afford to patch its own trousers. Her fingers were raw, her back a permanent curve of ache. The small cabin she shared with her brother smelled of lye soap, stale bread, and the sour tang of whiskey that Caleb brought home on his clothes, on his breath, in the very sweat of his apologies. Her father, a man of quiet strength and granite hands, was 2 years gone. He had left them this cabin and a name that meant something. Once, Caleb, older by 4 years, seemed determined to bury that name in the same red dirt. He was all hollow promises and a quick, desperate smile that never reached his eyes. Every cent Clara earned, every button she sewed, every seam she reinforced, it all seemed to drain away at the faro table in the back of the Last Chance saloon. "It's just a bad run, Clara," he would say, his hands shaking as he ate the supper she'd saved for him. "My luck is turning. I can feel it." She had stopped believing him last spring. Now, she just nodded, her throat too tight with a cold, hard knot of resentment and fear. The pile of mending grew, but the jar of coins hidden beneath the loose floorboard stayed stubbornly light. Winter was coming. The wind already had teeth, and the nights were long and cold. Clara pulled the blanket tighter, the one she had made from scraps, and listened to the familiar sounds of the dying town, the lonely howl of a coyote, the distant, frantic music of the saloon, and the click-click-click of her own thimble as she worked on a shirt for a man who might not have the coin to pay her. The knock on the door came late, long after the saloon music had died. It was not a polite knock. It was the heavy, flat sound of a fist meeting wood, a sound that meant business, not visiting. Clara's heart seized. She looked at the cot across the room. Empty. Caleb was not home. He had been gone since yesterday noon, and a sick dread had been coiling in her stomach all day. The knock came again, harder, rattling the door in its frame. "Open up! We know you're in there, girl." The voice was rough, scraped raw by wind and whiskey. Clara's hands went cold. She set down her sewing, the needle trailing a thin black thread. She rose slowly, her bare feet silent on the cold planks. She did not light a lamp. "Who is it?" she called, her voice barely a whisper. "Does not matter who we are. Open this door, or we will." She fumbled with the latch, her fingers stiff. The door swung open with a groan, letting in a rush of frigid night air that smelled of horses and stale sweat. 2 men filled the doorway, large and dark against the pale moonlight. They wore long dusters, their hats pulled low. She could not see their faces, only the glint of the moon on a pistol barrel holstered at one man's hip. "Clara Martin," the first man rumbled. "Yes, what do you want? Caleb is not here." "We know," the man said. He stepped inside, pushing her back with the simple act of his entrance. The other man followed, striking a match. The sudden, flickering light illuminated a small, mean-spirited smile. "We ain't here for Caleb. We're here for you." Clara backed away until her legs hit the small table. "I do not understand. I have no money." "Oh, we know that, too," the second man said, his voice higher, almost a wheeze. He lit her kerosene lamp, and the room jumped into stark relief. His eyes, small and quick, darted around the cabin, taking in the poverty, the mending, the cot. They settled on her, and his smile widened. "Your brother," he ran up quite a bill he could not pay. The cold dread in her stomach turned to ice. He said he would pay. He promised. I have a little. It is not much, but it ain't about money anymore." "Girl," the first man said. He was the one in charge. He stepped closer. She could smell the trail on him. "Caleb, he found another way to settle his debt. A more permanent solution. He signed papers." "Papers?" Clara's mind was slow, refusing to grasp the shape of the words. A contract. For services. Yours. He unbuttoned his duster, and the movement was so casual it was terrifying. He reached into an inner pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He did not hand it to her. He held it up. Your brother lost everything to Mr. Thorne. Everything he had, and a great deal he did not. Mr. Thorne is a powerful man, a cattle baron. He does not like to be kept waiting for what's his. I am not his, Clara said, the words sharp with sudden, pure terror. I am not property. The man's smile faded. That's where you're wrong. According to this paper, you are, at least until Caleb's debt is paid in full. Now get your things, just what you can carry in a minute. No, she whispered. No, you cannot. This is not lawful. The man sighed, a sound of profound boredom. The law is what Mr. Thorne says it is, where we are going, and we are hours from here. Nobody in this town is going to stop us. They are too busy drowning in their own misery to care about yours. Now, are you going to get a coat, or are you going to travel in your nightdress? She looked around the tiny cabin. It was all she had ever known. The walls her father had built. The stools she had sat on since she was a girl. Everything was suddenly precious, and it was all slipping away. She saw Caleb's face in her mind, his weak smile. He had not just lost money, he had sold her. He had sold his own sister. I have a bag, she stammered. Get it. She moved like a woman in a dream, pulling her small carpet bag from under the bed. She grabbed her thickest shawl, her father's worn coat, and a pair of sturdy boots. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely tie the laces. The men watched her, their silence a heavy, suffocating blanket. When she was done, she stood by the door, the bag in her hand. Please, she said, one last time, to the man in charge. My father is buried here. The man looked at her, his eyes as flat and gray as river stones. A lot of men are buried here. Get in the wagon. He blew out the lamp, plunging the room back into darkness. She stumbled out onto the porch, a large, dark wagon. The kind used for hauling freight stood in the muddy street, hitched to 4 strong horses. The second man, the wheezy one, was already on the driver's seat. The first man put a heavy hand on her back and pushed. Climb up! She was not given the seat. She was motioned to the back, an open flatbed with a few feed sacks and a heavy, damp canvas tarp. She climbed over the side, her legs clumsy with fear. The man did not get in with her. He swung up onto the seat next to the driver. Get moving! Silas! He said. The whip cracked, a sound like a gunshot in the silent town. The wagon lurched forward, throwing Clara hard against the side. She cried out, but the sound was lost in the rattle of the wheels. She scrambled to her knees and looked back. The cabin was already dark. A single window in the saloon still glowed a faint, sickly yellow. No one came out. No one called her name. The town of Redemption Creek turned its back, and Clara was gone. The journey was a blur of cold and misery. They did not stop, except to water the horses. The men, Silas and the one she now knew was called Hank, shared a bottle of whiskey and spoke in low rumbles she could not understand. They did not speak to her at all. The road, if it could be called that, was a muddy track cut through dense, dark pine forest. The wagon wheels threw up thick gouts of mud, and the cold, driving rain started an hour after they left town. Clara pulled the damp canvas tarp over her legs, but it offered little warmth. The wind cut through her father's coat as if it were cheesecloth. She was treated like cargo. When she had to relieve herself, she had to wait until they stopped for the horses, and Hank would walk her into the trees, his hand never far from the pistol at his side. He watched her with a casual, assessing gaze that made her skin crawl. On the morning of the second day, they finally stopped for more than a few minutes. They had left the forest and were in high, rolling plains, a vast, empty expanse of brown grass and gray sky. Hank built a small, smoky fire and made coffee. He gave her a piece of hardtack and a tin cup of the bitter, scalding liquid. She was so cold her hands shook, spilling half of it. Silas, the driver, was checking the horses. Hank came and sat on his heels by the fire, sipping his own coffee. "Eat up," he said. It was not a kindness. Clara chewed the hardtack. It tasted like sawdust. "Where are you taking me?" "Called the Broken T, Mr. Thorne's ranch." How long?" Hank shrugged. "We will be there by nightfall. If the creek ain't flooded." He looked at her, and his eyes were not mean, just empty. "You ought to know. Girl, Mr. Thorne. He's a particular man. He likes things quiet. You make trouble, he will make it worse for you. You understand?" "I will work," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "I am a good seamstress. I can cook. I can clean. I will work off my brother's debt." Hank almost smiled. He looked away, into the fire. "You just do what you're told, and maybe you will be fine." He spat into the flames. "And do not try to run. There is nowhere to run to. Nothing out here but 100 miles of grass. And Mr. Thorne owns all of it." As they were packing up, Hank looked at her small carpet bag. "What's in that?" Just my clothes. A few personal items." "Let me see." She handed it to him. He unlatched it and dumped the contents onto the muddy ground. Her spare dress, 2 chemises, her mother's silver locket, and a small, worn Bible. He picked up the locket, turning it over in his rough hands. "Please," she whispered, reaching for it. "That was my mother's." He looked at her, then at the locket. For a moment, she thought he would keep it. He tossed it back on the pile. "Mr. Thorne does not like his workers to have distractions or weapons." He nudged the Bible with his boot. "Those are not weapons." "Anything can be a weapon. Girl." He scooped up her clothes, ignoring the mud that clung to them, and stuffed them back in the bag. He kept the bag. "My clothes. Mr. Thorne will provide what you need." He tossed the bag into the front of the wagon. "Get in the back." The rest of the journey was silent. Clara sat, numb, her body aching and her mind a cold, empty void. They had not just taken her. They had taken her name, her past, her one connection to her mother. She was nothing now. She was just a piece of property, traveling to her new owner. They arrived at the Broken T Ranch just as the sun was bleeding out behind the western hills. It was not a ranch. It was a fortress. A high stockade fence surrounded a compound of low, dark buildings. The main house was a 2-story monstrosity of raw timber, looming over the smaller bunkhouse, barns, and sheds. It was isolated, miles from any other sign of life. Set in a bleak, wind-scarred valley, ranch hands, silent men with hard faces, stopped their work to watch the wagon roll in. Their eyes were not curious. They were dead. They looked at her, then looked away, as if she was not worth a second glance. A sense of profound, oppressive fear hung in the air. As heavy and cold as the evening fog, Hank pulled her from the wagon, his fingers digging into her arm. He marched her to the main house. The porch was wide, and a man stood there, silhouetted against the light from the doorway. He was tall and broad, smoking a thin cigar. The red tip glowed in the twilight. "You got her," the man said. His voice was deep and smooth, like polished stone. "Yes, Mr. Thorne. No trouble." "Good." Thorne stepped out of the shadow. He was not an old man, perhaps 40, but his eyes looked ancient. They were a pale, piercing blue, and they held no warmth at all. He was well-dressed, in a fine wool coat and clean boots. He looked at Clara, his gaze traveling from her muddy boots to her tangled hair, and he assessed her the way a man assesses a horse he is thinking of buying. "She's small," he said, as if she were not there. "Tough, though. Mr. Thorne," Hank said. "Did not cry once. Not once. We will see." Thorne took a long, slow draw from his cigar. "My name is Alistair Thorne. You are here because your brother is a fool and a thief. He gambled away money he did not have, and he used you as collateral. I have the papers. You now belong to me. You will work here, at my pleasure, until I decide his debt is repaid." "When will that be?" Clara asked, her voice trembling but clear. Thorne smiled, a thin, cold pulling of his lips. That is for me to decide. The terms are indefinite. It all depends on your behavior, on your willingness to please. He turned to Hank. Take her to the servants' quarters. Get Mrs. Finch to clean her up and put her to work. She will sleep in the storage room next to the kitchen. Yes, sir. Thorne looked at Clara one last time. Welcome to the Broken Tea, Miss Martin. I do hope you find your stay agreeable. He turned and went inside, the scent of his cigar smoke lingering in the cold air. The servants' quarters were a long, low building behind the main house. It was dark, and it smelled of boiled cabbage and despair. A severe, rail-thin woman with hair pulled back so tight it made her eyes water met them at the door. This was Mrs. Finch. She looked at Clara with no more emotion than Thorne had. Another one, she said, her voice like dry rust. He will be the death of us all. Get in, girl, and wipe your feet. I will not have mud in my kitchen. Clara was given a small, windowless room that was little more than a closet. It smelled of potatoes and mice. There was a thin straw pallet on the floor and a single hook on the wall. Mrs. Finch gave her a rough gray dress, stiff with lye, and a thin blanket. You will be up at 4. You will help me in the kitchen. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not look Mr. Thorne in the eye. And you will not go outside this building after dark. A guard is posted, for your protection. Clara looked at the door to her new room. There was a heavy bolt on the outside. Protection from what? Clara whispered. Mrs. Finch looked at her, and for a second, a flicker of some long-dead pity crossed her face. From everything, girl. Now get to sleep. 4 o'clock comes fast. Clara sat on the pallet, her body a single, throbbing ache. She was a prisoner. The silence of the ranch was more terrifying than the noise of the town. It was the silence of men who had forgotten how to speak, of women who had learned not to. She tried to resist, to hold on to the memory of who she was. Clara Martin, a seamstress, a daughter, but the image was already fading, like a photograph left in the sun. She was here, in this dark room, and her life was no longer her own. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. The work was brutal. From dawn until long after dark, she scrubbed floors, washed heavy linens, peeled mountains of potatoes, and served the silent, watchful ranch hands in the mess hall. She learned to keep her head down, her eyes on the floor. She was not assaulted, not in the way she had feared, but the threat of it was a living thing. It was in the way Thorne's eyes lingered on her when he came into the kitchen. It was in the way he would sometimes, as if by accident, brush his hand against her arm as she served him his coffee. His touch was light, but it felt like a brand. He was playing with her, a cat with a half-dead mouse. He was letting her see the cage, letting her feel the bars, letting the hope drain out of her drop by drop. She could feel herself breaking, the part of her that wanted to fight. The part that had spoken back to Hank was shrinking. She was becoming silent, like the others. She was learning to walk in a way that made her seem smaller, to disappear. One night, she woke to a sound. A man yelling, not in anger, but in pain. A choked, wet sound. She sat up, her heart pounding. The sound was coming from the barn. It went on for a long, terrible minute, and then it was cut short. The next morning, one of the ranch hands, a young man with freckles, was gone. No one mentioned him. It was as if he had never existed. Clara felt the last of her resistance crumble. There was no escape. There was no law. There was only Thorne, and the vast, empty land that he owned, body and soul. Then the storm came. It had been brewing for days, a heavy, oppressive weight in the air. It broke on a Tuesday night with the force of a divine judgment. The sky split open, and rain fell in solid, driving sheets. The wind howled like 1,000 grieving souls, rattling the very foundations of the house. Clara was in the kitchen, finishing the last of the dishes. When the shouting started outside, it was different from the yelling she had heard before. This was an alarm. Mrs. Finch, who never raised her voice, gripped her arm. "Stay here, girl. Do not move." The kitchen door burst open, and 2 ranch hands stumbled in, dragging something between them. It was a man. He was covered in mud and blood, his clothes torn to ribbons. They dumped him on the floor like a sack of feed. Clara gasped. He was unconscious, his face a pale, waxy color. A dark, spreading stain of blood soaked his side. Alistair Thorne appeared in the doorway, a glass of brandy in his hand. He looked down at the bleeding man on the floor with mild disinterest. "What is this?" Thorne asked. "Found him by the south fence. Mr. Thorne," one of the hands said, breathing hard. "Looked like he was trying to cut through, or just collapsed. Got a bullet in him. Looks a few days old." Thorne swirled the brandy in his glass. "A drifter or a rustler. Leave him. He will be dead by morning." "Sir," the hand said, shuffling his feet. "He was carrying this." He held up a heavy pistol belt. "It's a fine piece, and the horse he had looks like good stock. Just run half to death." Thorne's eyes flickered. He considered. A good horse, a good gun. These were assets. The man might be, too. He might know something, or he might be worth a bounty. He looked around the kitchen, his cold gaze landing on Clara. She was staring at the man, at the blood pooling on the clean floor. A slow, cruel smile touched Thorne's lips. He saw her fear, her revulsion, and he saw a new way to tighten the screw. "No," he said, his voice soft. "We will not let him die so easily. It is a waste." He pointed at Clara with his glass. You are good at mending. Let us see if you can mend a man." Clara's eyes widened. "Sir, I am not a doctor. I do not know how—" "You will learn," Thorne said. "Take him to the barn loft. It is dry enough. Clean him, stitch him up, keep him alive. I want to talk to him when he wakes up." He took a sip of his brandy. "He might be worth something. Do not fail me, Miss Martin. I would be most displeased." Hank and Silas, who had followed Thorne in, grabbed the man's arms. They hauled him up. His head lolled back, revealing a strong jaw covered in dark stubble. "Get the medicine box, Mrs. Finch, and rags, and whiskey." "Not the good whiskey," Thorne added. "Sir, Mrs. Finch said, her face pale. "She cannot. It is not proper." "Proper," Thorne laughed, a short, barking sound. "Proper left this place a long time ago. She will do as she is told, or she will join him." He turned and left the kitchen. "Mrs." Finch shoved a wooden box into Clara's hands, along with a stack of old linens. "Go," she whispered, her voice shaking with a fury Clara had never heard. "And God have mercy on you, child, because he will not." Clara, her legs feeling like water, followed the men out into the roaring, black storm. They dragged the unconscious stranger toward the barn, and she followed, a small, trembling woman carrying a box of bandages, into a darkness deeper than the night. The barn loft was a pocket of near silence, separate from the raging storm. The wind screamed over the roof, and the rain hammered the shingles. But up here, the air was thick with the warm, dusty scent of hay and the metallic tang of blood. Hank and Silas had dumped the stranger on a pile of old tarps and feed sacks, their expressions bored, as if he were just another piece of damaged property. "Thorne wants him alive," Hank had grunted, wiping the rain and mud from his face. "Do what you can, girl. But do not waste the good thread." He had left her with a single lantern, the medicine box, and a bottle of cheap, potent whiskey. Now, Clara was alone with the body. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling so badly she tucked them under her arms. The lantern light threw long, dancing shadows, making the man seem to an impossibly large, broken thing. He was breathing, but it was a shallow, ragged sound. "I cannot do this," she whispered to the empty, dark corners of the loft. But Thorne's face flashed in her mind, his cold eyes, his displeasure. Failure was not an option. She was a seamstress. She mended canvas, silk, and wool. She supposed a man was not so different. Just leather. "Forgive me," she said, her voice shaking. She uncorked the whiskey. "First, She took a small, burning sip for herself, a sin she would repent later. The fire of it hit her stomach and gave her a false, fleeting courage. She poured a generous amount onto a rag. He was a big man. Even in unconsciousness, he held an air of strength. His shoulders were broad, his hands calloused and scarred. He was not a soft man. He was, she thought, the kind of man who belonged in this hard country. In a way she never would. She had to cut his shirt away. The cheap cotton was soaked with blood and mud, plastered to his skin. She used her sewing shears, cutting up the side, revealing the wound. It was a ragged hole on his left side, just under the ribs. It was puckered and angry, the edges already turning a dark, bruised purple. It smelled of sickness. Clara's stomach turned, but she pressed her lips together. She cleaned it, first with water from the bucket she'd been given, then with the whiskey. He did not flinch, but a low groan escaped him, a sound from somewhere deep and unaware. It was when she was cleaning his back, preparing to roll him slightly to check for an exit wound, that she saw them. The lantern light was dim, but the scars were plain. His back was a map of old violence, a latticework of old, white lines, long-healed but permanent, lash marks, dozens of them, crisscrossed and brutal, and newer ones too, scrapes and deep bruises from whatever had brought him here. Clara's hand, which had been clinical, suddenly softened. She touched one of the old scars, a raised white ridge near his shoulder. This was not the work of a single fight. This was the work of a lifetime of pain. This was a man who knew suffering, a man who had been owned, or punished, in a way that made her own servitude feel new and raw. She found no exit wound. The bullet was still inside him. She could not get it, but she could close the hole. She took her own sewing kit from her apron pocket, selecting the strongest needle and the heaviest linen thread. She sterilized the needle in the whiskey, her hands now surprisingly steady. She had mended torn sails, and this felt much the same. She began to sew, her stitches small and tight, just as she would on a pair of Thorne's expensive trousers. She worked for nearly an hour, her head bent, the storm and the ranch and her own fear fading away, leaving only the task. When she was finished, she bandaged him with the torn linens, then covered him with a horse blanket. He was still pale, his breathing still shallow, but the bleeding had stopped. He remained unconscious for 2 days. The storm passed, leaving the ranch a sea of deep, sucking mud. Clara's life split in two. There was the life in the main house, the scrubbing, the serving, the constant, low-grade terror of Mrs. Finch's sharp tongue and Thorne's lingering gaze. And then there was the life in the loft. 3 times a day, she was sent to check on him, Thorne's orders. "Is it alive?" he would ask, and she would say, "Yes, sir, he is breathing. See that he continues to," was all he would say. The ranch hands, she learned, had found his horse, and his saddlebags, his name, they whispered, was Elias, just Elias, no last name. He was a drifter, maybe a bounty hunter, maybe worse. Heard he killed a man in Dodge. Silas, the wheezy driver, told Mrs. Finch over coffee, his voice low. Maybe 2. Sheriff is looking for him. Thorne could get a good price for him, if he lives. A murderer. Clara looked at the man lying still on the pallet, his dark hair matted with sweat. He did not look like a killer. He just looked broken. On the afternoon of the 2nd day, she brought him a cup of thin broth. She knew he could not drink, but she had to try. He had a fever now, a dry, burning heat that radiated from his skin. She sat on the small stool she had brought up and dipped a rag in the cool water, placing it on his forehead. The loft was quiet. The only sound was the distant ring of the blacksmith's hammer and the soft cooing of the pigeons in the rafters. She was so terribly alone, and here was a man who could not see her, could not judge her, could not hurt her. He was just an ear. "My name is Clara," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "I am from Redemption Creek. My father was a good man. He's dead." She had not spoken this much in weeks. The words, once started, came tumbling out, a quiet, desperate confession. I should not be here. My brother, Caleb, he's weak. He made a terrible mistake. He gambled. He sold me. Elias, he sold me like I was a sack of flour. She wiped his face again, his brow furrowed in his fevered sleep. I am so frightened. This place, Mr. Thorne, he watches me. I feel like I am disappearing. Like I am turning into a ghost. I do not know how to fight him. She rested her head on her knees, the rag in her hand. I think I am already dead. I think he already killed the part of me that matters. She sat there for a long time, talking to the unconscious man, telling him of the dust, the cold, the fear, and for the first time since she had left her home, she did not feel entirely alone. She felt a strange, impossible safety in his silence. He woke on the third morning. Clara had come up with the morning water. She set the bucket down and turned, and his eyes were open. They were not brown, as she had expected, but a pale, clear gray, like a winter sky, and they were full of suspicion. She froze. He was staring at her, his gaze sharp and assessing. Then he moved. It was so fast, it took her breath, in one fluid, agonizing motion. He launched himself from the pallet and grabbed her, his hard, calloused hand clamping around her wrist. The other hand went to her throat, not choking, but pressing, a clear, unmistakable threat. She cried out, dropping the tin cup she held. It clattered loudly on the wooden floor. "Where am I?" he rasped, his voice a dry, broken sound. He was pushing himself up against the wall, using her as a shield, his eyes darting around the loft, searching for enemies. "Please," she gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You are hurt. You will tear your stitches. Where am I?" It was not a question. It was a demand. The Broken Tea Ranch," she stammered. His eyes narrowed. The name meant something to him. His grip on her throat tightened for a second, and his gaze turned feral. "Thorne's place. Yes, please. You are bleeding again. I am Clara. I am trying to help you." He looked at her, truly looked at her. For the first time, he saw her plain, frightened face, her red, work-roughened hands. He saw the terror in her eyes, but it was not terror of him. It was just terror. His grip on her throat loosened, then fell away, though he still held her wrist. "Who are you?" he asked again, his voice softer, but no less suspicious. "Clara Martin. I work here. They found you by the fence." "You were shot, Mr. Thorne. He told me to keep you alive." He let go of her wrist, a sudden, complete release, and slumped back against the hay, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked down at his side. Fresh, bright blood was seeping through the white bandage. "Damn it," he breathed, clutching the wound. Clara rushed forward, all fear replaced by a sudden, urgent need to fix what had been broken. "You tore the stitches. You fool! Lie down! Lie down!" He resisted for a moment, his pride warring with the pain, but he was too weak. He let her push him gently back onto the pallet. "You have been asleep for 3 days," she said, her hands already busy, fetching clean rags. "You have a fever. You must be still." He watched her, his gray eyes guarded as she uncovered the wound. She had been right. 2 of the stitches had pulled clean through. I have to sew it again," she said, her voice small. He just nodded, his jaw clenched. He stared at the rafters as she cleaned it, his body rigid, but he did not make a sound. Afterward, they were quiet. She brought him water, and this time, he drank, his hands shaking as he held the cup. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why what? Why keep me alive? Thorne's not a merciful man." Clara looked down at her hands. "He said you might be worth something." A bitter, dry laugh escaped him. "He is right about that, I suppose, just not in the way he thinks." He looked at her. "Clara Martin, you work here?" "Yes." She could not meet his eyes. "You do not look like the other hands." I work in the kitchen, with Mrs. Finch." He was quiet again, but his eyes never left her. He was studying her, and his gaze was almost as unnerving as Thorne's, but for a different reason. Thorne's look was one of possession. This man's look was one of understanding. "You a prisoner too?" he asked, his voice low. Clara's head snapped up. "I am not a prisoner. I am working off a debt." Elias held her gaze. He did not need to say anything. The lie hung in the air between them, thin and fragile. Over the next few days, a routine was established. Clara tended to him, bringing him water and the thin, watery broth misses. Finch allowed, but Thorne, in a fit of casual cruelty, had given a new order. "He is awake now," he'd said when she told him. "He can suffer. A weak man is an honest man. Give him water. Nothing else. I will talk to him when he is good and desperate." But Clara, who had confessed her soul to this stranger, could not do it. She could not starve him. It began a small, secret rebellion. She stole a biscuit from the kitchen, hiding it in her apron pocket, the warmth of it like a burning coal against her leg. She slipped it to him under the blanket. He took it without a word, devouring it in 2 bites. The next day, it was a strip of jerky. The day after, a hard-boiled egg. She stole laudanum from Mrs. Finch's private pantry, telling the woman she had a toothache. She used it to clean his wound, instead of the harsh whiskey. Elias watched her. He was a quiet man. He was healing, his strength returning in small, visible increments. He was sitting up now, and yesterday he had stood, leaning heavily on the wall, his face pale but determined. He watched her when she came into the loft, and he saw things. He saw the way she flinched when the dinner bell rang from the main house. He saw the way she walked, head down, shoulders curved, a woman trying to take up no space at all. He saw the dead, hollow look in her eyes when she came up from serving Thorne his dinner, and the small, desperate spark that returned when she was in the loft, safe with him. He talked a little, not much. He told her he had worked cattle near Dodge. He had been a foreman. Once. "What went wrong?" she asked, darning one of his socks he had worn through. His face closed. "A man trusts the wrong people. A promise gets broken. Things happen." He would say no more. He was, she thought, a man made of secrets and pain, but he was her secret, her one act of defiance. The confrontation came on a moonless night, a week after Elias had woken. He was restless, pacing the short length of the loft, testing his strength. "I have to get out of here," he'd said that afternoon. "He will kill you for helping me." "You are not strong enough," she'd argued. "They will catch you in an hour." That evening, Thorne was drinking, heavily. Clara could hear his voice from the kitchen, a low, angry rumble. "Mrs." Finch was on edge, her face even more pinched than usual. She sent Clara to the stables. "The mare is coughing," she said, not meeting her eye. "Go mix a bran mash, and be quick about it. The master is in a foul mood." Clara's blood went cold. She had not been to the stables at night since she arrived. It felt like a trap, but she went. The stables were dark, the air warm and sweet with the smell of hay and horse. She lit a lantern, her hands shaking. The mare in the first stall whickered softly. She was in the feed room, mixing the hot water into the bran, when the main stable door slid shut with a heavy, final thud. Clara froze. She heard the sound of the heavy wooden bar dropping into place. "Good evening, Miss Martin." Alistair Thorne stepped out of the shadows, a bottle of whiskey in his hand. He was not wearing a coat, just his fine linen shirt, unbuttoned at the collar. He was smiling. "I have been very patient," he said, his voice a low, smooth purr. He advanced on her, and she backed away, her hands covered in the warm, sticky mash. "I have let you have your secrets. I have let you play nurse to that worthless piece of trash upstairs. Mr. Thorne, please," she whispered, backing up until she hit the wall, the grain bins hard against her back. "I am tired of playing. Clara." He was close now. She could smell the sour whiskey on his breath. "I own you. Did you think I had forgotten? Did you think I bought you just to scrub my floors?" I have done my work, she stammered. Your work is just beginning. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers biting into her flesh. He pulled her hard against him. You are here to please me, and I am ready to be pleased. He shoved his face toward hers. Clara turned her head, crying out, a small, choked sound. She brought her hands up, pushing against his chest, smearing the bran mash on his clean white shirt. For a second, he looked down at his shirt, his eyes wide with surprise. Then, his face darkened with a terrible, slow-building rage. He raised his hand. Let her go! The voice came from above, from the darkness of the hayloft that overlooked the feed room. It was not loud, but it was full of iron. Thorn let go of Clara, pushing her to the ground, and stumbled back, looking up. Elias was standing on the crossbeam above them. He looked like a specter, pale and gaunt in the lantern light. He was swaying, clearly weak, but in his hands, he held a long, three-pronged pitchfork. He held it like a rifle, the tines aimed directly at Thorn's chest. What the hell is this? Thorn spat, wiping the mash from his shirt. You should be dead. Let her go, Elias said again, his voice rasping with the effort. Get out! Thorn looked at the pitchfork. He looked at Elias, a man with nothing to lose, balanced precariously above him. He was drunk, but he was not a fool. He knew a desperate man when he saw one. He glared at Clara, who was huddled on the floor, shaking. This changes nothing. Girl, you hear me? He straightened his shirt. As for you, he snarled at Elias, you are dead. When you hit the ground, you are dead. Thorn turned, strode to the door, fumbled with the bar, and slammed it open. He stalked out into the night, leaving the door wide. Silence. The only sound was the nervous stamp of the mare and Clara's own ragged breathing. Then, from above, came a crash. Clara scrambled to her feet. Elias had fallen from the beam. He was lying in the hay, clutching his side, his face a mask of agony. She ran, stumbling up the ladder to the loft. You fool, she whispered, her voice breaking. You absolute fool. He had torn the stitches, all of them. The wound was open, bleeding freely, dark and terrible in the lantern light. He was, Elias gasped, his teeth gritted. He will kill you now, she sobbed, pressing her own apron against the wound. Frantic. He will kill us both. She worked, her hands shaking, her mind numb with terror. She cleaned him, stitched him again, her tears falling onto his pale skin. He was conscious this time, his eyes squeezed shut, his hand gripping the edge of the tarp until his knuckles were white. When she was finished, she slumped back against a hay bale, the adrenaline draining away, leaving a cold, hollow void. She was shaking so hard, she thought she might break apart. She had been so close. Thorn. Elias was quiet, his breathing harsh. After a long, long time, his hand, rough and warm, moved across the hay. His fingers found hers. She started, looking at his hand. It was not a grab, like Thorn's. It was not a threat, like his own had been when he first woke. It was just a touch, a question. She turned her palm up, her small, trembling fingers laced with his strong, calloused ones. They sat in the dark, silent loft, just breathing. He had saved her, this broken, murdering drifter. He had saved her. His eyes found hers in the dimness. They were no longer suspicious. They were no longer guarded. They were just tired. And something else, something warm. She found herself leaning in. She did not know why. She just wanted to be close to the only warmth she had felt in this entire frozen world. Her face was inches from his. She could smell the hay and the sharp, clean scent of the whiskey she'd used on his wound. She could see the small lines around his eyes. She saw him watch her mouth. She was so close. And then the reality of what she was doing, of where she was, came crashing back. Thorn, the pitchfork, the blood. She pulled her hand from his as if she had been burned. She scrambled to her feet, her face hot with a shame and fear she could not name. I have to go, she whispered, her voice choked. Mrs. Finch will. She will be looking for me. She fled. She did not look back. She scrambled down the ladder and ran from the stables, leaving Elias alone in the dark, the echo of her near kiss hanging in the air between them. The morning after the confrontation in the stables was heavy with a silence that felt worse than shouting. Clara moved through the kitchen in a fog of terror, her hands shaking as she scrubbed the heavy iron pots. Mrs. Finch watched her, her mouth a thin, disapproving line. The old woman knew. She might not have seen what happened, but she could smell the smoke of Thorne's rage. "You've brought trouble, girl," Mrs. Finch hissed, slamming a slab of bacon onto the cutting board. "You were told to be invisible. You were told to be quiet. Flying too close to the flame just gets your wings burned." Clara said nothing, her throat too tight. She had no wings. She had only chains. When she served breakfast, Alistair Thorne was at the head of the table, dressed impeccably, as if the night before had never happened. He was reading a day-old newspaper from Cheyenne. He did not look up when she entered, but she felt his awareness, a cold, heavy pressure in the room. She set his plate of bacon and eggs on the table, her hand trembling so badly the fork rattled. "Careful, Miss Martin," he said, his voice a smooth, pleasant baritone. He still did not look up from his paper. One would hate to see such a delicate thing get broken. He picked up his coffee cup. "I trust you slept well. The stables can be so very drafty this time of year, full of pests." "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I slept well." "Liar," he murmured, so low only she could hear. He finally lifted his eyes. They were cold and bright and full of a terrible, patient amusement. He was in no hurry. He would not just punish her. He would dismantle her. He was enjoying her fear, letting it ripen. "Get out. The sight of you spoils my appetite." Clara fled back to the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. All day. She worked, and all day. She felt his eyes on her. When she swept the porch, he was there, watching from his office window. When she took the scraps to the hogs, she saw him standing by the corral, ostensibly talking to a hand, but his head was turned her direction. He was a spider, and she was the fly. Already caught, and he was just waiting, savoring the moment before the kill. He would kill Elias. She knew that. He would wait until Elias was half-healed, then drag him from the loft and make an example of him. And her fate would be worse. That night, she was not sure she had the courage to go to the barn. To stay away was to condemn Elias to a slow death by thirst and fever. To go was to walk deeper into the trap. She made her choice, after Mrs. Finch bolted the kitchen door and went to her own small room. Clara slipped out the pantry window, a small, desperate act of defiance she had practiced in her mind. She had stolen more than just herself. Tucked in her apron were a thick slice of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a small, square bottle of laudanum she had taken from the medicine chest. The night was cold and sharp. She ran, hunched over, from shadow to shadow, her bare feet silent on the cold, damp ground. The barn loomed dark, but she knew the guard Thorne had posted was at the main house. His duty to keep her in, not to watch the barn. He thought his quarry was already dead. She climbed the ladder, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. The loft was dark, but he was there. She could feel him. "You came back." His voice was a low rasp from the shadows. "You are a fool," she whispered, her voice shaking with anger and fear. She lit the small lantern she had hidden under a feed sack. He was a mess. He was leaning against the far wall, his face pale, his shirt dark with fresh blood. He had tried to stand, tried to fight, and he had torn open the stitches for the third time. "He knows," Elias said, his voice flat. "He knows I'm here. He knows you're helping me. You should have run. Clara, not come back here." "Run where?" she snapped, her terror making her sharp. "There is nowhere. I told you. Now, lie down. You are bleeding like a stuck pig. He will kill you. He will kill me anyway. He will kill you first, if you do not let me fix this. Now lie down." He sank onto the pallet, his face tight with a pain he refused to voice. She knelt beside him, her hands clumsy as she cut away the ruined bandage. The wound was angry, a raw, gaping line. "This is the last time," she said, her voice trembling as she threaded her needle in the lantern light. "I have no more good thread. You cannot keep doing this." "He touched you," he said, his voice a low growl. She paused, the needle halfway to his skin. He did not get what he wanted. This time. Elias's jaw was granite. She said nothing. She just began to sew, her stitches tight and angry. He did not flinch, did not make a sound. He just watched her, his gray eyes burning in the dim light. She cleaned the wound with the laudanum, her touch as gentle as she could make it. She gave him the bread and cheese, which he ate like a man starved. He was healing again, but it was slower this time. The infection had taken a shallow hold, and he was feverish for 2 days. Clara lived on a knife's edge. By day, she endured Thorne's cold, watchful presence, his polite, cutting remarks. By night, she slipped away to the loft, bringing water, bringing broth, bringing a part of herself. She stole for him. It was a small, bright point of rebellion in her gray, hollowed-out life. She stole a pair of worn denim trousers from the laundry line and a dark wool shirt that smelled of lye soap. They were too large, but they were whole. She found an old saddlebag in the tack room, its strap broken. She took it to the loft, and in the quiet hours of the night, while Elias slept his fevered sleep, she mended it, her needle and thread moving with a fast, sure grace. It was a comfort, the simple, familiar act of making something whole again. They planned his escape. It was his escape, never hers. "The supply wagon," she whispered one night. As she changed the bandage, his fever had broken. "It comes every 2 weeks. From town, that is tomorrow night. The men, they get distracted. They unload the flour and the whiskey. The guard at the gate, he'll be helping. You could slip out then. Your horse is still in the east pasture. I've seen it." "And you?" he asked, his voice still rough. He was sitting up, his back against the hay, the mended saddlebag at his side. "I will stay." "No," he said it flatly. "You come with me." "You are a fool," she said. But this time, the words were soft. "Look at me, Elias. I am Thorne's property. I am on a piece of paper in his desk. He would hunt us, not just you, us, you. You are a drifter, a ghost. You can disappear. You can be someone else. I cannot. I am a name on a ledger." He would send bounty hunters. He would send the law. We would not make it a week. "So you will just stay here? Let him—" He could not finish the sentence. "I will survive," she said, though she did not believe it. You live. Get strong. Get free. That will be enough." He was quiet, his gaze heavy. He watched her pack the stolen clothes into the saddlebag. The loft had become their world, the small, hay-scented space, suspended between the brutal earth and the indifferent sky, was the only place they were real. The silence that had first existed between them was now filled with words, spoken in whispers in the deep, dark hours. He watched her one night, her head bent, the moonlight from the small loft window catching the stray hairs that had escaped her braid. "You saw the scars," he said. It was not a question. She looked up, her hands still. "Yes, on your back. I was a foreman, on a ranch in Kansas. The Bar K. Had 100 head of cattle, 20 men under me. I was good at it. I was building something." He shifted, the hay rustling. "The rancher, he had a daughter, Sarah. She was frail, a sickness in her lungs. Sweet girl. Always reading books she got from back east." He paused, his voice hardening. "She died. I found her by the creek. She'd been coughing blood for months. I carried her back to the house. She died in her bed that night." Clara listened, her heart aching for this stranger, who was becoming less strange every night. Her PA was broken by it, and his new wife, a young, greedy woman. She wanted her cousin to have my job. She hated me. He stared at his hands, large and scarred, resting on his knees. The next morning, the sheriff was there. He pulled a knife from under my bunk, one of my own skinning knives. Said it was covered in blood. "But you said she was sick," Clara whispered. "She was, but the stepmother, she remembered seeing me and Sarah arguing, said I had forced my attentions on her, that Sarah had refused me. So I, he choked on the word. The sheriff found a small cut on Sarah's hand. From her needlework. Probably, but they said it was from the knife. He never even looked at the girl's body proper. He was paid, I knew it. A rancher's daughter. A hired hand. They didn't need a trial, just a rope. So you ran. I broke out of that Tin Star jail. A deputy. I pushed him. He fell, hit his head. I do not know if he lived or died. I ran. I've been running ever since. They say I'm a murderer. For Sarah. For the deputy. Maybe I am. Clara looked at him. At this man hunted for a lie. She saw the pain in his eyes, the deep, aching injustice of it. And she saw her own story reflected there. He called me property, she said. Her voice so low he had to lean in to hear her. His head snapped up. Thorn. No, my brother, Caleb. And the story. Her own confession, spilled out. The saloon, the cards, the cold, empty feeling when she realized he had not just gambled away the money, but her, too. He did not just use me as collateral, Elias. He sold me, like a cow, like a sack of flour. He signed a paper. Hank, the man who brought me here, he showed it to me. For services. That's what it said. Indefinite. She was crying now, silent, hot tears of shame and rage. Thorn, he is just waiting. He told me. He is waiting until I am agreeable. He wants me broken. He wants me to know I am nothing, just a thing he owns. Elias said nothing. He sat as still as stone, his face a mask. But in the dim light, she saw the muscle in his jaw clench, again and again. She saw his hands, fisted in the hay, the knuckles white. He was radiating a rage that was so profound. It was almost silent. It was a rage for her, and it wrapped around her, a strange, fierce comfort. The air in the loft changed after that. It was charged, heavy with the things unsaid. They were two fugitives, hiding in the same small space, their stories laid bare. The next night, the night of the supply wagon, she brought him a last meal, a small canteen of water, more bread, and a stolen apple. As she handed him the apple, their fingers brushed. The touch was like a spark on dry tinder. She did not pull away. He did not either. He set the apple down, his eyes holding hers. Clara? He reached out, his hand rough from work and weather, and traced the line of her jaw. His thumb was calloused, but his touch was unbelievably gentle. It brushed her bottom lip, a simple, questioning touch. She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing, a small, broken sound escaping her. He leaned in. He was going to kiss her. She knew it. She wanted it. His lips met hers. It was not a hard, demanding kiss, like the one she had feared from Thorn. It was slow and deep and full of a desperate, aching loneliness. It tasted of dust and apples, and a sorrow so deep it felt like her own. It was the first choice she had made in months. His other hand came up, his fingers tangling in the braids she had not had time to redo. He pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened, his mouth moving over hers. Hungry now. She felt the coiled strength in his arms as he pulled her down onto the hay, his body half covering hers, and for a second, a spike of pure, animal panic went through her. He was kissing her throat, his breath hot against her skin, and she gasped, and he stopped. He froze, as if she had struck him. He was breathing hard, his eyes squeezed shut. With a groan, he rolled off her, putting a foot of cold, empty space between them. He was shaking. Elias? She whispered. She was confused, her heart hammering, her body aching with a strange, new emptiness. I cannot, he rasped. He turned away from her, sitting up, scrubbing a hand over his face. I will not. What? I do not understand. I will not be him, he said, his voice a low, torn growl. I will not be another man who takes from you. I will not be Alistair Thorne. I will not use you. I will not. He saw her desire, her surrender, and he mistook it for the fear she had lived with for so long. He thought he was saving her, but he was just leaving her alone again. He moved to the far corner of the loft, near the window, his back to her. You should go. Clara, the wagon will be here soon. Go back to the house, and be safe. Live. He was dismissing her. He was sending her back to her cage. She stood up, her legs trembling, and she gathered the last of her dignity. She did not cry. She just watched him, this good, honorable, broken man, who thought he was protecting her. She left. She climbed down the ladder, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The next day was a living hell. Thorne had gone, riding out to a distant part of the ranch. The house was quiet, but Clara's mind was screaming. Elias was gone. She knew it. The wagon had come. She had heard the shouts and the rumble of the wheels. He had taken his chance. He had left her. She felt a hollowness that was worse than the fear. She was truly, completely alone. But that night, when she did her rounds, checking the pantry, she saw it. The window was still unlatched. She had forgotten to fix it. She walked to the barn. She did not run. She did not hide. She was just moving. She did not know why. She did not even know if he was there. She was just drawn to the one place she had felt alive. She climbed the ladder. He was there. He was standing by the window, in the exact same place, staring out at the moon. The mended saddlebag was at his feet. He turned, and his face was a mask of agony. Clara, I told you to go. You did not leave, she said. It was not a question. The wagon came, he said, his voice hoarse. I was at the gate. I could not. Why? You, he said. Just that one word. She stood in the patch of moonlight that fell through the loft door, and she looked at him. At this man who would rather stay and face Thorne's justice than leave her to it. And she knew what she had to do. Slowly, her fingers steady, she went to the row of small, pearl buttons at the collar of her gray work dress. She undid the first one. Clara, he said, his voice sharp, strained. What are you doing? Stop. No, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. She undid the second button, and the third. You looked at me, Elias, and you saw something broken, something to be saved. She pulled the dress from her shoulders, letting it fall, puddling around her waist. Her white chemise was thin, her form a shadow in the silver light. I am not his, she said, her eyes locked on his. And I am not yours to protect. I am my own. She untied the thin ribbon at the neck of her chemise. She pushed the straps from her shoulders. The fine, worn cotton slid down her body without a sound, pooling with the dress at her feet. She stood before him, naked in the moonlight. She was bearing more than her skin. She was bearing the small, faded scar on her hip from a childhood fall, the bruise on her arm from where Thorne had grabbed her. She was bearing her soul. I have been owned, she whispered, her voice catching. I have been traded and sold and threatened. My body is a debt to be paid. She took a step closer to him. He was frozen, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and a terrible, beautiful pain. She stopped, just out of his reach. If I am already owned, she whispered, let me choose. Let me choose who gets my soul. He took a shuddering breath. Clara, do not, she said, her voice breaking just a little. Look at me like I am a saint. And do not treat me like I am a whore. Just see me. He moved. He crossed the space between them in one stride. His hands, those rough, scarred hands, came up, but they did not grab. They cupped her face, his thumbs tracing the line of her cheekbones, as if he were blind and he was learning her. I see you, he whispered. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of pity. It was not a kiss of honor. It was a kiss of truth. It was all the tenderness he had been forced to bury, and all the fire she had been forced to hide. He lifted her, his healing side protesting, but he did not care. He carried her to the softest pile of hay, the one she had prepared for him, and he laid her down as if she were a queen. Their first time was not gentle. It was desperate. It was fumbling and urgent and real. It was two broken people, clinging to each other in a cold, dark world, trying to forge a single whole thing. He was so careful, so afraid of hurting her, but she met his desperation with her own, her hands claiming him, her body arching to meet his. It was a promise. It was a defiance. It was a choice. And it was, in its own way, a prayer. Afterward, they did not speak. They lay entangled, his arm under her head, her face pressed against the steady, solid beat of his heart. She had never, in all her 22 years, felt so safe. She slept, and for the first time since a lie had stolen his name. Elias did not dream of a noose, or a sheriff, or a shallow grave, and for the first time since she had been stolen from her home. Clara did not dream of cold blue eyes, or a debt, or a locked door. They slept, wrapped in the hay-scented darkness. Two souls no longer owned by fear, but only by the small, fragile warmth they had made together. The first pale gray light of dawn crept into the loft, turning the shadows from black to a deep, bruised purple. It was the light of reality, and it fell across Clara's face, waking her for a single, blessed second. She did not know where she was. She was warm. She was not alone. She was wrapped in the scent of hay and the solid, living heat of the man beside her. Elias. Then, memory returned, and the warmth soured into a cold, sharp dread. She sat up, pulling the horse blanket to her chin. The air was cold, and she was naked, and she felt a sudden, terrible vulnerability. Elias was awake, too. He was lying on his side, watching her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. What had she done? He reached out, not to grab, but just to touch her hair. "Morning," he said, his voice a low rumble. We cannot," she whispered, pulling away, scrambling for her chemise. "I should not. I have to be in the kitchen." "Clara." He sat up, his movement still stiff, but the wound in his side was finally healing, the edges knitting together with a healthy, red pucker. "We leave. Tonight." She paused, her hands frozen in the act of buttoning her dress. "What?" "We leave," he said again, his voice firm. He was no longer the half-dead drifter. He was the foreman. "I am strong enough. You've seen to that. We can take 2 horses from the stable, ride east. By the time he finds us gone, we will be 100 miles from here." Her heart gave a single, violent leap of hope, and then the reality of her life crashed back down, extinguishing it. "No," she said, her voice flat. She turned to face him, the gray light showing her the desperation in his eyes, a desperation that matched her own. "You do not understand. You can leave. You are a ghost. You can slip away, and Thorn will curse, but he will let you go. You are just a drifter." "I am not leaving you, and I am not leaving with you," she said, her voice a fierce, broken whisper. "Do you think I am the first? He has men. His men are everywhere. He has bounty hunters who owe him. He has watchers in every town from here to Kansas. If you run, he will hunt you. If you take me," she pressed a hand to her mouth, the sob catching in her throat. "I am his property. That is what he will tell them. He will say you stole me. They will not just hunt you, Elias, they will hunt you for a thief. They will hang you, and they will bring me back." He stood up, his own anger rising, a different kind of fire than the one from the night before. "So what? You stay here? You stay here and wait for him to what? To get bored? To finally break you? I will kill him first." "No," she said, grabbing his arm. "That is what he wants. He wants a fight. He wants a reason. You do not know him. He does not just own this ranch. He owns the sheriff. He owns the law. There is no one to help us." Running is not freedom. It is just a different cage, a smaller one, a moving one. We will never be free. Then what do you want me to do? Clara, he yelled, his voice echoing in the small space. I want you to live, she cried. Go, please, tonight, get away from here. If you feel anything for me, just go. That will be enough. He looked at her, and his anger broke, leaving his face carved with a deep, aching sadness. You are wrong, he said, his voice quiet again. It will not be enough, not for me. He saw the fear in her eyes, the logic of her prison. She was right. He could not outrun Thorne's money. He could not outrun Thorne's law. He has the paper, she whispered. In the house, the contract. As long as that paper exists. I am what it says I am. Elias looked at his hands, then at the house, visible through the hay door. A new, colder resolve settled over him. Then I will get the paper, he said. If we cannot run, we will fight, but not with guns, with the truth. Clara's life in the following days was a new, refined kind of torture. Thorne's patience, it seemed, had run out. His polite, veiled threats were gone. He was still watching her, but the look was no longer one of patient ownership. It was suspicion. It was a cold, hard calculation. He knew something was wrong. He could smell the defiance on her, like smoke. He had started small, petty cruelties. He accidentally knocked a full pot of scalding coffee from her hand, then berated her for the mess. He had misses. Finch assigned her the worst, most brutal tasks, rendering lard in the boiling heat, scrubbing the bunkhouse floors on her hands and knees. And all the while, Elias was healing, and he was watching. He had given up on escape. He was now a hunter, trapped in the same cage as his quarry. He spent his days in the loft, his body growing stronger, his wound now just a tight, angry scar. He worked his muscles, using feed sacks for weight, stretching, moving. He had to be ready. At night, he did not rest. He moved. He slipped from the barn, a shadow in the deep, moonless dark. He was a foreman. He knew the rhythms of a ranch. He knew where the power lay. It lay in the main house. It lay in Thorne's office. He spent 3 nights just watching the house. He learned the guards' patterns, Hank, mostly, or Silas. He learned that Thorne kept a lamp burning in his office until well after midnight, that he drank a glass of whiskey at 10 and another at 12. He learned that the back kitchen window had a loose latch. On the 4th night, he went in. Clara, in the terror of her daily life, had found a way to help. She had seen him watching. She understood. That afternoon, when cleaning the kitchen, she had taken a small sliver of lye soap and jammed it into the track of the window, keeping it from closing all the way. Elias slid the window open. The house was silent. He moved without a sound, his bare feet on the cold, polished floor. He knew where the office was. He eased the door open. The room was dark, the embers in the fireplace just a faint, dying glow. It smelled of cigar smoke, leather, and power. He lit a single match. He did not go to the desk. He went to the walls. He was looking for a safe. A man like Thorne, a man who kept ledgers of human beings, would have a safe. He found it behind a large, garish painting of a cattle herd. A modern, black iron safe with a combination dial. He cursed, soundlessly. He was a cowboy, not a bank robber. He could not open it. He spent an hour, his hands feeling for any weakness, his ears listening for any sound. Nothing. He slipped back to the loft before dawn, his heart a cold stone of frustration. A safe, he told Clara, when she came with his morning water, her face pale and drawn, a new bruise darkening her cheek. She flinched when he gently touched the bruise. He said I was clumsy. A safe, Elias repeated, his voice a low, hard growl. I cannot open it. Clara's mind, sharpened by fear and a desperate, flickering hope, went to work. He is vain, she whispered, her mind racing. He is a creature of habit, the combination. It would be something that matters to him. His birthday? The day he founded the ranch? How do we find that? The desk, she said. He has a large ledger. He writes in it. I have seen it when I clean. It is his life. I will look tomorrow. The next day, she was sent to clean his office. Thorne was there, at his desk, watching her, every sweep of her broom, every pass of her dust rag. She felt his eyes on her. She saw the ledger. It was open. He was writing. She dusted near him. And in that one fleeting second, she saw the date at the top of the page. August 14th, 1863. The day. She read. He had purchased the land that night. She told Elias. He went back. The numbers. 8, 14, 63. Turned in the dial. The heavy steel tumblers clicked into place. The door swung open. He lit a match. It was not full of money, though there was some. It was full of papers, contracts, deeds, and a small, leather-bound book. His fingers, rough and shaking, found it. A single sheet, folded. Contract of indenture. Clara Martin, signed by her brother, Caleb, and by Alistair Thorne. He tucked it into his shirt, his heart hammering. He felt a moment of pure triumph. He had it. He could burn it, and she would be free. But he had seen the other papers. He had seen the book. He pulled out the small ledger. He opened it. The match flame guttered. He lit another. It was a list of names. Mary, 18, from Laramie. Debt, $45. Anna, 16, from Cheyenne. Debt, $100. Eliza, 20, from Denver. Debt, runaway, closed. It was a list of girls, a dozen names. Some, like Eliza's, were crossed out. He felt sick. Anna, the small, terrified girl who helped Mrs. Finch in the kitchen, the one who never spoke, who cried in her sleep. She was on the list. This was not a ranch. It was a prison. This was not debt. It was trafficking. He took the book. He took Clara's paper. He closed the safe. He put the painting back. He returned to the loft as the sky was turning gray. He showed her. She looked at her own name, the cold, black ink that defined her. Then she looked at the list. She saw Anna's name. He is a monster, she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. He is, Elias said, his voice grim. But now we have the proof. We can go, she said, her eyes wide with a new, terrifying hope. We can take this to the sheriff in town. He will have to arrest him. No. Elias's voice was flat. He had not told her everything. He had not told her what he had learned while hiding near the bunkhouse 2 nights before, when a man wearing a tin star had ridden up to the main house. Elias had been close enough to hear Thorne's laughter through the open window. He had heard him offer the sheriff a cigar and a contribution. That drifter you reported, the sheriff had said, his voice lazy. The one with the bounty. Elias, was it? Any sign? Wound got infected. Thorne had replied smoothly. He died. We buried him on the ridge. A pity. I'd have liked the money. A pity, the sheriff had agreed. Well, let me know if any more of your property gets lost. Elias looked at Clara, at her desperate, hopeful face. He could not tell her. He could not tell her that the law had already pronounced him dead and her property. The law's a long way away. Clara, he said, his voice gentle. First, we have to get clear. We will go. Tonight. We have the proof. We will find a U.S. Marshal. Someone he cannot buy. But they were too late. Their small rebellion, their stolen moments, had been noticed. Clara was running late. She had stayed too long. The sun was up. She had to get to the kitchen. She all but flew down the ladder, holding the small ledger and her contract. Hide these, she pleaded. He tucked them into his own shirt, against his skin. Be safe. Act normal. Tonight. Clara, we go. She ran across the yard. She was halfway to the kitchen, her feet flying. Miss Martin! The voice was not loud. It was soft and polite, and it stopped her dead. Alistair Thorne was standing on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. He had not gone to the fields. He was watching her. Elias, in the loft, froze. He watched from the shadows of the hay door. "You are late," Thorne said, his voice carrying in the still morning air. I'm sorry, sir. I woke late." "Did you?" Thorne sipped his coffee. He walked down the steps, moving toward her. "That is strange, because I have been awake for an hour, and I have been watching. You were not in your room, Mrs. Finch was quite distressed, and you were not in the kitchen." He stopped, just a few feet from her. "You seem to be coming from the barn." Again, Elias's hand went to the knife in his boot. He was too far. He was helpless. I was checking on the mare," Clara stammered. "The one who was sick." "The mare is fine," Thorne said, his voice dropping, the polite facade vanishing. "I have been patient. Clara, I have allowed you your flights of fancy. I thought you were a bird I was taming, but I see now. You are just a rat, hiding in the hay. Who is in there?" He grabbed her arm. Not a polite touch. A violent, bruising grip. "No one," she cried. "Liar," he snarled, and he began to drag her. Not to the barn. He was dragging her toward the house. Elias watched, his body rigid, his heart a cold, hard knot of pure, burning rage. He could do nothing. If he showed himself, they would both be dead. Thorne dragged her past the kitchen, past a terrified Mrs. Finch, and stopped at a thick, heavy oak door near the pantry. He pulled a large iron key from his pocket. "I was hoping to break your spirit," he hissed, his face close to hers. "But I see you require a more fundamental lesson. A few days in the dark will make you agreeable." He unlocked the door, revealing a set of steep, dark stairs leading down. The smell of cold earth and rotting potatoes wafted up. The cellar. He shoved her. Clara screamed, a short, cut-off sound of pure terror as she tumbled down the steps and into the blackness. Thorne slammed the heavy door. He turned the key in the lock, then dropped a heavy iron bar into place. Elias was still watching. He had seen her face. He had heard the lock. Thorne turned to Hank, who had been watching from the porch, his expression bored. "Guard this door. She gets bread and water, once a day. No one else goes near it. If you see that drifter, shoot him on sight. He is no longer of any use to me." Thorne brushed his hands on his trousers, his composure restored. He went to his office. Night fell. The ranch was silent. Elias sat in the loft, the papers in his shirt a burning weight against his chest. He had sat there all day, a statue of pure, focused hatred. He watched Hank. He watched him sit on a stool by the cellar door, his rifle across his lap. At 2 a.m, Hank was dozing, his chin on his chest. Elias moved. He slipped from the barn, carrying a heavy piece of firewood, thick as a man's arm. He did not go to the cellar. He went to the kitchen window. He was inside the house in seconds. The house was asleep. He moved through the pantry. Hank was just on the other side of the door, his back to him. Elias was not a killer. He was a foreman from Kansas. He was a man who had run from a fight. He was not that man anymore. He stepped out of the pantry. Hank's head jerked up, his eyes wide in the dim light. He had no time to raise his rifle. Elias brought the piece of firewood down, hard, on the side of Hank's head. There was a dull, wet, cracking sound. Hank collapsed like a feed sack, his rifle clattering on the floor. Elias did not check to see if he was breathing. He did not care. He lifted the heavy bar. He fumbled with the lock. He tore the door open. "Clara!" he called, his voice a harsh whisper into the black, cold space. A sound, a sob. "Elias?" Her voice was a ghost. He went down into the darkness. He found her, huddled on the dirt floor, covered in filth, her hands raw from trying to claw at the door. He did not speak. He just lifted her into his arms. She was so light, she clung to him, her face buried in his neck. He carried her. Not out of the house, not to the barn. That was what they would expect. He carried her up the main stairs, to the second floor, past Thorne's own bedroom. He carried her to the guest quarters. A room at the end of the hall, clean, unused, smelling of lavender and dust. He carried her inside and bolted the door. He lit a small lamp on the bedside table. He set her down on the fine, quilted bed. He poured water from the pitcher into the clean porcelain basin. He took a soft cloth, and he began to wipe the dirt from her face. And she broke. It was not a scream. It was a collapse, a complete and total unraveling. Her body began to heave, silent, racking sobs that shook her from head to toe. "I do not want to be brave anymore," she wept, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Elias, I cannot. I am so tired. I cannot fight him. I am not strong." "I know," he whispered, his voice rough. "I know. You do not have to be. I am here." He wrapped his coat around her shaking shoulders. He sat on the bed and pulled her into his lap. And he held her. He held her as she cried out all the fear, all the humiliation, all the cold, dark loneliness of the past months. He held her as the dawn crept closer. After a long time, the sobs quieted. She was just trembling, empty. She looked up at him, her eyes swollen, her face streaked with tears and dirt. He lowered his head. He did not kiss her mouth. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her eyelids. He kissed the tear tracks on her cheeks. And when she lifted her chin, he kissed her lips. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss from the loft. It was slow. It was intimate. It was a promise. It was a vow made in a silent room. In the heart of the enemy's fortress, he laid her back on the clean sheets. He did not take. He did not demand. He worshipped. He made love to her, slowly, wordlessly, his touch a promise to erase the memory of thorns, his presence a shield against the dark. It was a claiming, not of her body, but of her soul, back from the man who had tried to steal it. They lay in the dim gray light. Clara was asleep, her breath, for the first time, even and peaceful. Elias watched her. He felt the papers against his chest. He felt the list of names. Anna, Mary, Eliza. He knew what he had to do. Running was not enough. The law was not enough. He gently slipped out of the bed. He looked at Clara, so beautiful in her sleep. He looked at the lamp on the table, its small, steady flame. He looked at the papers he had pulled from his shirt, the contract, the ledger. He thought of Clara in the dark. He thought of Anna, who never spoke. His choice was made. He picked up the ledger. He knew where the office was. He knew where Thorne kept his other ledgers, his records of cattle, of feed, of money. "If law will not help you," he whispered, his voice a low, hard rumble, "then fire will—" He began his plan. He would not just burn the papers. He would burn the record. He would burn the office. He would burn the very idea that a man could own another. And if the house caught fire, then the house would burn. He would destroy the cage itself. The gray, watery light of false dawn was a betrayal. It crept into the fine guest room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air, and found Clara wrapped in Elias's coat. She was not asleep, but she had found a place deeper than rest, a stillness in the center of the storm. Elias was already standing, a shadow by the window, watching the ranch begin to stir. A light had come on in the bunkhouse. A man coughed. The machine of the broken tea was waking up, unaware that it was already dying. He had Clara's contract and the small, damning ledger tucked into his shirt, a weight against his ribs, but it was not enough. He had seen the safe. He knew there was more. And he had seen the cellar. He turned. Clara was watching him, her eyes large and dark, but the fear was gone. It had been burned out of her, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. She was no longer the girl from Redemption Creek. She was a woman who had been dragged to hell and had decided to take it with her. "It is time," he said, his voice low. She nodded. She did not cry. She did not tremble. She stood, wrapped in his coat, and walked to the door. "He is still out?" she whispered, her thoughts on Hank. "He will not be getting up," Elias said, his voice flat. He had checked on his way up. The man was breathing, a low, wet snore. But he would be of no use to Thorne for hours. They moved through the sleeping house. It was a tomb, smelling of old money and stale violence. They passed the cellar door, its heavy bar still lying on the floor next to the unconscious guard. Elias paused, his hand tightening on the knife at his belt. He looked at the door, and his rage was so cold it was almost clean. They reached the office. The door was unlocked. Thorne, in his arrogance, had never thought the fight would come to him, from inside his own walls. The room was as they had left it, steeped in the smell of cigar smoke and whiskey. Elias went straight to the painting and swung it aside. He worked the combination, 8, 14, 63. The heavy door clicked open. "What else?" he said, pulling the metal box out. "The desk," Clara said, her voice clear and steady. She was no longer a victim. She was a witness. She went to Thorne's massive oak desk and pulled the drawers open, one by one. He kept letters. From the sheriff. From a judge in Cheyenne. He bragged about it once. Said he owned the law. She found them, tied in a neat ribbon. Letters confirming bribes, warning of Marshall's patrols, discussing the transfer of assets. Assets that had names. Elias, meanwhile, was emptying the safe. He pulled out 2 more ledgers, larger than the first, bound in thick, dark leather. He opened them. These were not lists of girls. These were the ranch accounts, and woven into the numbers for cattle, and feed, and barbed wire, were the payments. Payments to men like Hank. Payments to Caleb, Clara's brother, and payments to Thorne. From men in towns as far away as Denver, for seamstresses and housekeepers. He was not just a baron. He was a spider, and his web covered half the territory. All of it, Elias said, his voice a low growl. They piled it on the desk. The letters, the ledgers, the accounts. A mountain of paper. A monument to one man's greed and another's destruction. Clara added the last drawer's contents, maps of the territory, with certain routes and homesteads circled in red ink. He was hunting them, she whispered, her stomach turning. She recognized one of the homesteads. It was where Eliza, the girl with her name crossed out, had come from. Elias looked at the pile. He looked at Clara. He saw the firelight from their first night in the loft reflected in her eyes. "You are sure?" he asked. "There is no coming back from this. I was never going back," she said. "Burn it." He did not use a match. He took the heavy glass kerosene lamp from the desk, the one Thorne used to read his ledgers. He unscrewed the top. He poured the oil over the papers, the desk, the rich carpet. The smell was sharp, an acrid promise. He stood back. He took Clara's hand. He struck a single match. "For Mary," Clara whispered. "For Anna," Elias added. "And for Eliza," Clara said. Elias dropped the match. The world exploded. The kerosene-soaked papers ignited with a whoosh that sucked the air from the room. A wall of orange flame climbed the heavy drapes, tasting the dry wood of the walls. The desk, the center of Thorne's web, became a roaring pyre. The heat was instantaneous, brutal. "The window!" Elias yelled. He grabbed a heavy chair and smashed the glass, letting the cold morning air rush in, feeding the beast he had unleashed. They climbed out, Elias dropping to the ground first, then reaching up to catch Clara, swinging her clear just as the flames burst through the doorway behind them. They stood on the lawn, in the cold, gray dawn, and watched the heart of the broken tea burn. Shouts erupted from the bunkhouse. "Fire! Fire! In the main house!" Men came running, half-dressed, their faces stupid with sleep. They grabbed buckets, formed a line from the water trough, but it was useless. The fire was too hot, too fast. It was an old, dry house, and it burned like tinder. "It is the master's office," one man yelled. "He is in there?" another cried, his voice high with panic. "No!" The voice cut through the chaos like a whip. Alistair Thorne stood on the front porch. He had come from his bedroom, dressed in his nightshirt, his face black with soot, his hair singed. He held a pistol in his hand. He looked at the inferno consuming his office, his power, his life's work, and then he saw them. He saw Elias, the dead man, standing tall and whole, and he saw Clara, his property, standing beside him, her head high, her hand in the drifters. His face, in the flickering orange light, became a mask of pure, inhuman rage. He did not say a word. He just raised the pistol, his aim steady, pointed not at Elias but at Clara. "No," Elias said, and Clara moved. She stepped directly in front of Elias, her small body a shield. She looked at the man who had owned her face calm in the terrible firelight. "You cannot have him," she said. "Get out of the way, girl." Thorn snarled, his voice a low, shaking growl. Elias put his hand on her shoulder, trying to push her behind him, but she was immovable. She was granite. "No," she said again, her voice ringing out in the yard, clear and strong, silencing the frantic shouts of the ranch hands. "No more." Thorn's eyes flickered from her, to Elias, and back. He saw the defiance. He saw that she was not just unbroken, she was unbreakable. Elias stepped out from behind her, his own gun now in his hand. He had taken Hank's rifle. No, it was his own pistol, the one Clara had retrieved from the saddle room, the one she had hidden for him. He stood beside her, their shoulders almost touching. They were a single, united front. Thorn laughed, a high, cracking sound. "You think this saves you? You, a whore and a murderer? I own you, girl. I have the paper." "No, you do not," Elias said. He reached into his shirt. He pulled out the small, leather-bound ledger and Clara's contract. He held them up. Thorn's eyes widened. His face went pale. The fire was burning his house, but those were his soul. "She is not yours, Thorn," Elias said, his voice rolling over the yard. "A judgment. She was never yours." He looked at Clara. Her gaze was fixed on the paper, the symbol of her chains. The flames from the house were leaping high, and embers were falling like hot, orange snow. A piece of the burning porch roof had fallen into the yard. A small, separate bonfire. Elias walked toward it. He held Clara's contract out. He held it over the flames, and he let it go. Clara watched the paper curl. She watched the ink of her brother's name, of Thorn's name, shrivel and turn black. She watched her debt, her services, her indefinite term, all turn to weightless, gray ash that floated up and disappeared into the smoke-filled sky. It was done. She was free. The sound that ripped from Alistair Thorn's throat was not human. It was the sound of a beast being gutted. His control, his power, his very identity had just vanished into the air. He raised his pistol. He did not aim at Elias. He aimed at the paper in Elias's other hand, the small ledger, the list of names, the last piece of his power. "No!" Thorn screamed. Clara saw the move. "Elias!" Thorn drew a bead. Elias did not hesitate. He did not aim for the ledger. He shot first. The sound of his pistol was a single, flat crack that was louder than the fire. Thorn cried out, a high, sharp sound, and staggered back, clutching his leg. The pistol fell from his hand, skittering across the dirt. He collapsed onto the porch steps, his nightshirt staining a dark, spreading crimson. Elias stood, his pistol still smoking, his face hard, his eyes on Thorn. Silence. The ranch hands froze, the fire raged. And then, another sound. Hoofbeats, fast. A group of riders thundered into the compound, their horses lathered. At the front was a man with a tin star on his chest, the sheriff. He pulled his horse to a skidding stop, his eyes taking in the scene, the burning mansion, the wounded cattle baron, the armed drifter, and the woman who looked like a ghost. "What in God's name?" the sheriff started, his hand on his own pistol. Thorn, grasping his shattered leg, pointed a shaking finger at Elias. Shoot him! He is a murderer! He shot me! He is Elias, the man with the bounty! Shoot him!" The sheriff drew his gun. He leveled it at Elias. This was the man who paid him. This was the law he knew. "Drop the gun, son," the sheriff said, his voice hard. "You are under arrest." Elias did not drop the gun. He just looked at the sheriff, his eyes cold. "He is a slaver," Elias said, his voice calm. "What did you call him?" The sheriff spat. "He buys and sells women. He traps them in debt and sells them." "That is a lie," Thorne howled, trying to get up, but falling back. "Is it?" Elias held up the small, leather-bound book, the one he had not burned. "I have the ledger, with names, with dates, with the prices. Anna, from Cheyenne. Mary, from Laramie." He looked at the sheriff, and his eyes were full of a terrible, cold knowledge. "And I have his letters. Sheriff, the ones you wrote him, the ones about the runaway assets, the ones about me." The sheriff's face went white. He looked from Elias to the ledger, to Thorne. He was a bought man, but he was not a fool. The power had shifted. Thorne's house was ash. His proof was gone. Or worse, in the hands of this drifter. The ranch hands were watching, their faces blank. The law was whatever the man with the gun and the proof said it was. And right now, he was too late, and he was on the wrong side. Slowly, his hand shaking, the sheriff lowered his pistol. He put it back in its holster. "Seems like a dispute," the sheriff said, his voice hoarse. "Between private parties." Elias nodded. Just once. He grabbed Clara's hand. He began to walk, not run, toward the stables. The ranch hands, the men who had feared Thorne for years, parted for them like water around a stone. Elias and Clara reached the stable. The horses were screaming, terrified of the smoke. He found his own horse, and he grabbed the reins of a fast-looking bay mare for Clara. He saddled them with a speed born of pure, desperate focus. He threw Clara into the saddle. He mounted his own. He looked back one last time. The main house was a roaring inferno. The sheriff was staring at the flames, a man trapped between his past and his future. Thorne was on the ground, bleeding, forgotten. Elias kicked his horse, and they rode. They rode hard, past the burning stockade, past the terrified, silent faces of the ranch hands, and out onto the high plains. They did not look back. The sun was rising, a bloody red smear on the eastern horizon, and behind them, a column of thick, black smoke climbed into the sky, a signal of their passing, a monument to the life they had just burned to the ground. They rode all day, pushing the horses, pushing themselves. They crossed rivers, climbed ridges, and descended into the dark, cool canyons, leaving the smoke and the memory of the broken tea far behind. Night found them in a small, rocky canyon, sheltered by high walls of granite. A small creek trickled through the rocks. It was silent. The only sound was the breathing of the horses and the high, lonely cry of a nighthawk. Elias made no fire. He simply unsaddled the horses and let them drink. Clara slid from the mare's back, her legs buckling. She had not spoken a word for 10 hours. She had just ridden, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Now, in the safety of the dark, the adrenaline fled. It left her cold and empty and shaking. It started in her hands, a fine tremor. It moved to her arms, her legs, until her entire body was vibrating, as if she would fly apart. It was not just fear, it was joy. It was the terror of being free. It was the sudden, crushing weight of having a choice. Elias came to her. He put his coat around her, the one she had worn in the guest room. He sat on the cold rocks and pulled her down, turning her so her back was against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her, lending her his strength, his stillness. She leaned into him, her teeth chattering. She was cold, but she was alive. She was empty, but she was full. They sat like that for a long time, under a blanket of cold, diamond-bright stars. "What now?" she finally whispered. Her voice was a dry, cracked sound. It was the biggest question in the world. Elias was quiet for a moment. He looked up at the stars, at the infinite, open, unowned sky. He tightened his arms around her. He smiled, a faint, slow curve of his lips in the dark. "Now," he said, his voice a low, sure rumble against her hair. Now we go find something worth living for. The high passes were a purgatory of wind and stone. For weeks, they were ghosts, haunting the spine of the world, never dropping into the peopled valleys. They rode until the horses were spent, ate jerky and cold biscuit, and slept in the ruins of other forgotten lives, abandoned trappers' cabins, hollowed-out trees, shallow caves smelling of fox and damp earth. Elias was a different man in the wild. He was no longer the wounded, haunted drifter from the loft. He was quiet, but it was the quiet of a man listening, not a man hiding. He read the bent grass, the disturbed stones, the set of the clouds. He taught her, his voice a low rumble in the vast silence. At first, Clara was just a survivor. She did as she was told, her body numb, her mind still back in the smoke-filled yard, her eyes fixed on the ashes of her contract. She was free, but she did not know how to be free. She only knew how to run. One evening, in a high, cold meadow, he had unstrapped the pistol from his own belt and handed it to her. "But first, you need to know how," he'd said. It was not a request. She had flinched. The weight of it was obscene. A heavy, cold block of iron. I am not a killer. Elias, neither am I," he'd said, his voice flat. "But I will not let the world decide when I die, and I will not let it decide when you die. This is not for killing. This is for living. Hold it." She did. Her hand, so used to a needle, was clumsy. He stood behind her, his hands guiding hers, his body a solid, warm wall at her back. He showed her how to stand, how to breathe, how to let the world go still until there was only the target, a knot on a distant, dead pine. The first shot, the explosion of fire and sound, threw her back a step. She cried out, the noise shocking in the quiet. The shot had gone wide, kicking up dirt 10 feet from the tree. "Again," he said. She fired again and again. She fired until her shoulder ached and her ears rang. She fired until the fear of the noise was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. On the 7th shot, she hit the knot, a small smile, the first she had felt in a year, touched her lips. He taught her to ride. She thought she knew how, but she had only ever been a passenger, perched on a wagon or a borrowed mare. He taught her to ride like she was part of the horse, to feel the animal's muscles, to lean into the gallop, to become wind and speed. She grew strong, the girl who had scrubbed floors. Her body curved in a permanent, submissive stoop, was gone. Her shoulders squared, her back straightened. Her hands, cut and calloused from the rains and the rocks, were her own. The sun and the wind turned her skin a light, healthy brown, and her eyes, once dull with fear, were now sharp, clear, and constantly scanning the horizon. Just like his, she learned to track, to make a smokeless fire, to skin the rabbits Elias caught in his snares. She learned the land, and in learning it, she learned herself. The fear did not leave all at once. It seeped out of her, slowly, like a poison. For the first 2 weeks, she would wake with a gasp, her hands reaching out, her heart hammering, the smell of cigar smoke in her nose. But Elias was always there. He would not hold her, not at first. He would just be there, a solid, living presence in the dark. And he would say, "You are safe, Clara. He is gone. You are safe." One day, they were riding through a low, aspen-filled canyon, and Elias's horse, usually so sure-footed, stumbled on a loose rock. He did not fall, but he was pitched forward, grabbing the horse's mane, his hat flying off, his language a short, colorful curse. Clara reined in, and a sound she did not recognize bubbled up in her chest. It was a laugh. It was not a whisper or a giggle. It was a full, deep, throaty laugh that startled the birds from the trees. Elias righted himself, pushing his hair from his eyes, his face a picture of stunned dignity. He looked at her, and his own hard, grim mouth softened. He began to smile, a slow, real smile that lit his gray eyes. The laugh ended on a sob, and she was crying, her hands over her face, the reins loose. He was off his horse in an instant, pulling her down. I am sorry," she wept, the tears hot. her body shaking. It is the first time. I did not know I could. It is all right, he said, his arms closing around her, pulling her against his chest. It is the best sound I have ever heard. The first bounty hunter found them a week later, at a river crossing. He was a small, weasel-faced man who had seen them from a ridge, 2 riders on good horses. He was not looking for them specifically. He was just looking for trouble. He had cornered them, his rifle aimed at Elias's chest. Well, the man had sneered, his eyes on Clara. What have we here? A man running with stolen goods. I'd wager. Elias had not moved. His hands were raised, his face calm. We are just travelers. Friend, we do not want trouble. The trouble's found you, the man said, his eyes lingering on Clara. Now, the lady. She'll come with me. You can die here. Clara, who had been sitting on her horse, her hands in plain sight, did not wait. She did not look at Elias. She just moved. Her pistol was in her hand, cocked and fired. It was one smooth motion. The sound was deafening. The bounty hunter screamed, his rifle firing into the air as he clutched his shoulder, his eyes wide with pure, agonized shock. He had not even been looking at her. Elias was on him, the man's rifle gone, his body hauled from the horse and slammed against the rocks. Elias's knife was at his throat. Who sent you? Elias roared, his face a mask of cold fury. Nobody, the man wept, the blood pouring through his fingers. I swear, I saw the girl, I swear. Elias looked at him, his disgust a palpable thing. He did not kill him. He took his gun, his horse, and his boots. He left him by the river, bleeding, with a long walk back to wherever he had come from. They rode in silence for an hour. Clara was shaking again, but it was not fear. It was the thunder of the shot, the recoil in her arm. Elias rode up next to her. He just looked at her, his face unreadable. You shot him, he said. He was going to kill you, she replied, her voice steady. You did not aim for his chest. No, she said. I aimed for his shoulder, just like you taught me, a target that size. I did not want to miss. He rode on, but she saw him, when he thought she was not looking, throw his head back, his face to the sky, and she saw the quick, sharp line of his smile. The days blurred into a long, sun-drenched haze of travel. The fear was truly gone now, replaced by a simple, shared existence. They were heading north, toward the Montana border, toward a place Elias said was empty. One hot, dusty afternoon, they found a river, a wide, slow-moving ribbon of green water, hidden in a deep, cottonwood-lined valley. It was the first real water they had seen in weeks. Clara just stopped, staring at it. I smell like a horse, she said. You do, Elias agreed. He was smiling. So do you, she shot back. He dismounted and began to unbutton his shirt. Last one in is a fool. She had never, in her life, done anything so reckless. She was off her horse, fumbling with her own buttons, her boots. They ran, like children, their clothes shed on the bank, and plunged into the shocking, blessed cold of the water. It was a baptism. They splashed and laughed, and she scrubbed the trail dust from her hair, the grime from her skin. The water washed away the last, lingering shadows of the broken tea. He was standing in the waist-deep water, the sun on his face, watching her. The laughter faded, replaced by something quieter, deeper. She waded toward him. The water was a gentle pressure around them. She looked at his chest, at the healed-over line of his wound, her stitches. She reached out and touched it, her fingers tracing the puckered scar. It is healed, she whispered. You have a good hand with a needle, he said, his voice a little rough. She looked up at his face, at his clear, gray eyes, and then she turned, and she looked at his back. The scars were still there, the old, white lines, stark against his sun-darkened skin. She had saved his life, but she could not erase his past. She moved behind him, and she pressed her lips to the largest scar, the one that ran from his shoulder to his waist. She kissed the raised, rough flesh. She tasted the river, and the sun, and the salt of his skin. He shuddered, his hands fisting at his sides. He turned, slowly, and pulled her against him, their bodies wet and slick, the water swirling around their hips. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick. She kissed him. It was not a kiss of desperation, like in the loft, or of slow comfort, like in the guest room. It was a kiss of pure, sun-drenched intimacy. It was a kiss of choice. It was a kiss that said, "I see all of you, and I am not afraid." He led her from the water, and they made love on the sun-warmed grass, under the shade of the cottonwoods, with no sound but the rush of the river and the beating of their own hearts. They found their valley 2 weeks later. It was just as he had described it. A high, wide bowl of green near the Montana border, protected on all sides by pine-covered hills. A creek full of wildflowers, cut through the center, and at the far end, tucked into a stand of aspen, was a run-down cabin, its chimney long cold, its roof half gone. "It is not much," Elias said, his voice quiet, as they sat on their horses, looking at it. It is everything," Clara whispered. "It is a place to stop." He had gold. He rode to a town, a small, dusty outpost called Three Forks, 100 miles south, and returned a week later with a pack mule, a deed, and a bag of coins. "The gold?" she asked. "From before," he said, unloading sacks of flour and salt. "I was saving it. For a new start. I did not think I would ever get to use it." They rebuilt the cabin, plank by plank. They chinked the logs with mud and straw. They rebuilt the roof, cutting new shingles from a fallen pine. Elias hunted, and his rifle, once a tool of fear, now meant meat in the pot. Clara planted a small garden with seeds he had bought, her fingers in the rich, dark earth. They worked from sunup to sundown. It was hard, brutal work, but it was their work. Every nail Elias hammered was a choice. Every seam Clara stitched for the new curtains was a line drawn against her past. They were ghosts, turned real by the simple, solid weight of timber and stone. They lived simply. They spoke little, but they were in a constant, silent conversation. A look across the room, a shared smile over the fire, the easy way he would hand her a log, the way she would hand him his coffee. One night, the first real cold snap had set in. The fire in the new stone fireplace was roaring, and the wind was howling outside. Clara was mending one of Elias's shirts. She realized, a seamstress again. But now, she sewed for love, not for survival. She put the shirt down. She was sitting on the bearskin rug they had bought from a traveling trapper. She was wearing a simple wool dress, her feet bare, her hair in a long, thick braid. Elias was cleaning his rifle, the lamplight glowing on his dark hair. She touched her hip. Through the dress, she could feel the small, faded line. "I used to think it made me ugly," she said, her voice soft. He looked up, his hands stilling. "What?" "This." She lifted the hem of her dress, just a few inches, revealing the pale, silvery scar on her hip. "I got it falling from a tree when I was 10. I was always so ashamed of it. I thought no man would want someone damaged." Elias put the rifle down. He came to her, kneeling on the rug beside her. He looked at the scar, and his gaze was so gentle, it made her heart ache. He bent his head. He pressed his lips to it. A warm, firm kiss. "It makes you real," he whispered, his lips against her skin. You are not a doll, Clara. You are made of all of it, the falls, the scars, and the strength. That is what I love." They held each other as a storm, a real, crashing thunderstorm, rolled over the distant hills. The sound was a low, angry rumble, a reminder of the world they had left, of the storm that had first thrown them together. Clara lay beside him in their new bed, a bed he had built with his own hands. She was warm, and she was safe, and the thunder could not touch her. I was never free, she whispered into the dark, her voice tracing a new truth. Not when I was in my father's house, not in the town, not even when we rode from that fire. I was always so afraid. I was never free until you looked at me like I was worth saving. She felt his arms tighten around her, pulling her back against his solid, warm chest. He was quiet for a long time, the only sound the drumming of the rain on their new roof. "And I will keep looking," he replied, his voice a low, sure promise in the dark. The story ends, as all stories must, but it does not end with fire, or blood, or running. It ends on a quiet dawn, months later, with the first snow of winter dusting the valley. The firelight from their hearth paints the small cabin with a warm, golden light. The smell of strong coffee and wood smoke fills the air. Outside, the world is Husgaz. Inside, two souls, no longer owned by anyone, no longer defined by the scars they carry, sit at a small, rough-hewn table. Their hands are clasped, his large and scarred, hers small and strong. They watch the snow fall, and they are, at last, simply and completely home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope it brought a little piece of the wild, untamed West into your day. My name is Clara, and I share stories from the heart of the American West. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. I would love to know where you are listening from. So please, leave a comment and let us know what part of the world you are in. And if you have any thoughts on Clara and Elias's story, please share them in English. Your words and your support mean the world to us.